And then we saw two black cats, big black cats about the same size, that picked out a sheep and a lamb and cornered it in the corner of the field and were about to attack.
Seeing is believing, and I have no proof of what I saw that day other than what I can describe. It was huge. It was like the weightlifter of cats.
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Welcome to episode 54 of Big Cat Conversations. We're coming to you in early July 2021 if you're listening to this one on schedule. Our guest is Darren Naish. Many of you will know him from his high profile in recent years with the TET blog. Darren is a dinosaur geek, a great communicator on aspects of science and evolutionary biology, and the particular topic of big cats wild in Britain features amongst his many interests. So we are, of course, chuffed to have him on the podcast. Darren, welcome along. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me as a guest. I've listened to all episodes so far. I've really enjoyed it. It's great to be here. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff. We won't test you on past episodes, but nice to know that you're with us. You are, first and foremost, described as a vertebrate paleontologist, but I know you have other interests beyond that. So can you tell us what the main thrust of your activity is?
I am qualified as a vertebrate paleontologist. I did a PhD specialising in lower Cretaceous dinosaurs of southern England, which I finished in around about 2006. I write widely on living and extinct animals. That involves a combination of doing technical research. I do field work, dug up new species in the Sahara and done lots of field work in Eastern Europe, Romania in particular. I have also published on the conservation biology of South American mammals, the history of cats, your special interest area, the evolution of birds, what we know about the bird fossil record, and quite a lot of scholarly work on mystery animals, sea serpents, not necessarily saying they're real animals, but what have people written about them, how have people evaluated claimed sea monster sightings. The British big cat mystery is among my top sort of 10 major interests. You've already mentioned the blog Tetrapod Zoology, currently hosted at tetzoo.com. I've done quite a few books, the newest of which is Dinopedia, which comes out probably September 2021. So, and I also work for the BBC Natural History Unit at the moment. So I am deeply involved in the natural history filmmaking world at the moment. And I don't know how long that will last for, but fingers crossed, frankly.
Well, excellent. Yeah, well, they've recruited well. The book coming out, is that aimed at a general audience or adults or children or what?
Yeah, it's Dinopedia is aimed at a general audience. It's not written for specialists. On the subject of dinosaurs, there's this kind of stigma that things written for dinosaurs always have to be written for kids. But it's like, I think adults are interested in the subject as well. I'm being facetious. I know that adults are interested. There is, in general, a lack of popular level books on prehistoric animals. This particular book is a kind of tour through our developing knowledge of where we're at right now with dinosaurs, because, as I'm sure you know, things have changed remarkably, even just this century, within the last couple of decades.
So, yes, in fact, I was party to a discussion of artists, I don't know how you would describe them, but people who illustrate dinosaur books and dinosaur websites and dinosaur art, and they were saying it's quite challenging to keep up to date with some of the field research, which is presenting new morphological interpretations from fossil finds and analysis of the morphology of some of these creatures.
Yeah, the field is termed paleo art, the reconstruction of the animals of the past. And you could say it is hard to keep up with because now finds are coming in so quickly. But what's perhaps maybe more interesting is the fact that there's widespread recognition these days that there's an awful lot of stuff that we don't know and we almost can't ever know. And there's a kind of general acceptance that there's some things that we're allowed to speculate on. And there's all these, ridiculous number of possibilities when you look at the behavior and life appearance and biology of living animals. It's really, it's a totally different game from the mid 20th century view of dinosaurs. They were all grey and lived in swamps.
Yeah, and of course the artists then at work on these subjects are actually very influential in their work, because they are actually framing our perceptions of these creatures that we're thinking about. Darren, if people want to follow your work on social media or websites, what's the best place to start looking to find you?
Tetrapod Zoology is kind of my brand, and I started blogging in 2006. I'm at the 4th iteration of Tetrapod Zoology, so that's the main output for my popular writings. I'm at TetZoo on Twitter. And Tetrapod Zoology, I cover everything from, writing about the biology, evolution, life appearance of dinosaurs and other extinct ancient animals, pterosaurs, the flying reptiles from the age of dinosaurs. I do a lot of stuff on those, marine reptiles. I've written a lot about mystery animals, cryptozoology. My most popular articles are on Bigfoot. That seems to be hugely, hugely popular of all the things I've written.
Yeah, even beyond America.
That is a whole another subject, as they say. Bigfoot. We should avoid it, because I could just talk about that for hours. Not just in terms of the phenomenon itself, but also in terms of it as a socio-cultural phenomenon. The fact that, thanks to one TV series in particular, here in the UK, we've now got a growing population of people that are not just fascinated by the phenomenon. I mean, I always say with mystery animal reports, no matter what is at the bottom of them, whether there's a real flesh and blood animal or not, this is a fascinating phenomenon that's worthy of study, even if it is only a socio-cultural thing. But you've also got a huge number of people that have been inspired to actually spend more time in the wilderness. I think sometimes kind of kidding themselves in the UK, they could find Bigfoot in the UK. This is actually a growing point of view. I don't want to be too mean towards that view, because anything that's kind of encouraging people to engage more with the outdoors and with nature, I'm sure you'd say the same thing. It's like as soon as you hook someone into an interest in wild places, what's the next step? It's basically, if you've got a connection to a wild place, you want a green place. It doesn't have to be wild. It can be in the middle of a city.
Yes.
But it encourages people to want these areas to persevere into the future. And for me, that's absolutely key. We've got to do everything we can to encourage people to be more interested in preserving and protecting green spaces. Yeah,
collateral benefits, becoming more alert and becoming advocates of nature and noticing more about the subtle detail of nature. If those big charismatic things, whether they're real or not, encourage that's got to be helpful, whatever age you are. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
And this great term, tetrapod, which you use as your brand, it's a 4-footed animal, technically, but of course there's a great deal more to that. You've hinted at some of the meaning of tetrapod, but in a nutshell, how do you summarise what tetrapod is?
So increasingly in scientific discussions of animals, we talk about what are called clades. A clade is a group of organisms where everyone in the group shares the same single ancestor. And tetrapoda is a clade. So it's a group of animals. Everyone descends from one single ancestral species. Now, that single ancestral species was itself a kind of fish. So tetrapods are a specialized subgroup of fish. Specifically, they are lobe-finned bony fishes, animals akin to coelacanths and lungfishes. And tetrapods are the group of lobe-finned bony fishes that evolved limbs and digits. So round about very approximately 400 million years ago, a new group of these weird fishes evolved. The tetrapods, they evolved limbs and digits for whatever reason. It's quite complicated why they evolved those features. And they took over the land. They gave rise to the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals. So once you are within that clade, you descend from an ancestor that has digits and limbs, but of course, evolution happens, things change. So on many, many occasions, on hundreds of occasions, tetrapods have modified their digits and limbs, and of course, in many cases, have actually lost them partially or entirely. So snakes and dolphins and limbless amphibians and so on, they're all tetrapods. They are part of that clade. But basically, it's reptiles, amphibians, birds and mammals, living and extinct. Those are the tetrapods.
Even if we can't see their 4 feet.
Even if they've lost them over evolutionary time, or we can't see all 4 of them, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. The evolutionary thing is going to be a common factor, and we'll come on to that in the latter part of our discussion when we get back to British big cats in terms of your thinking. The main sort of pretense for having you on was to sort of talk about the deep geological time history of cats and big cats in Britain and Europe. Can we first of all just hear about the research paper that you published, I think it was 2013, on this Canadian lynx that was shot in Devon around 1903, it's thought, isn't it? And the Bristol Museum and Art Gallery turned it up, didn't they, and brought it to your attention?
Yeah, I'm good friends with a zoologist called Max Blake, who I think today is regarded as an entomologist. I think he works on beetles. And in 2010, Max mentioned that he'd, while curating specimens in the collections of Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, he'd been surprised to discover this lynx, suggested to be a Canada lynx. Yeah, and that there was documentation showing that it had been shot in 1903, or circa 1903, near Newton Abbot in Devon. And I'm like, do you realise how significant that is? If the specimen exists and there's paperwork, a paper trail essentially showing that it was shot in the wild. The accompanying documentation said that it had attacked 2 dogs, and a gentleman whose name I can't remember had shot it, and he'd donated it to another person, a Mr. Hebb, I think. No, it was Mr. Niblett was the one who shot it, and Mr. Hebb was the one who procured it for the museum, and they had it stuffed, and there it is, a mounted lynx. So I think this is definitely worthy of a scientific paper, and we did every kind of analysis that we could do on this specimen in order to, first of all, confirm exactly what kind of lynx it was. I've said that it was a Canada lynx, but the actual specimen itself is a bit ambiguous. It does have some Canada lynx features, but it also has a few features that are seen in bobcats. And both of those species are variable enough across their enormous ranges that, surprising as it might seem, there's a few populations where you actually struggle to differentiate them, especially young ones, and especially where they've been a bit distorted through taxidermy.
Because you couldn't get a DNA hit from any of the samples of fur or anything.
No, that's right. So the final paper involves like a kind of dream team of people that might work on a British big cat. Gregor Larson, who's a well-known paleogenomicist, and Ross Barnett, who's also an ancient DNA guy, and in fact regarded as one of the world's experts on the DNA of extinct and old cats. Manabu Sakamoto, who's a well-known morphometrist he's published a load of stuff on the proportions of the skulls of cats, and Charlotte King and Jeff Noel, a bunch of other people as well. We tried to extract DNA and were unsuccessful. Not totally surprising. It is often difficult to get good DNA from old museum specimens, partly because of the preservatives that have used on them due to contamination over the years, lots of human handling, that kind of thing. We took strontium isotope measurements from the bones and teeth in order to see if they would give us some indication as to where the animal had been living. We got some valid results, but frustratingly, you can use strontium isotopes to work out where an animal's been living. The isotopes present in the rocks get transferred to food and water, and animals literally, lock the isotopes into their tissues. But the strontium isotope ratio for the kind of Dartmoor area is about the same as it is for the Canadian Shield, just by complete fluke. So that didn't help us to work out whether this animal had been living in the wild or not. The morphometrics on the skull demonstrated that the skull was from a Canada lynx, but it's actually kind of 2 specimens. It's a mounted skin, which is on a taxiderm mount, and then separate from that is the skeleton. Now, normally, as you know, when people build a taxiderm mount, they incorporate lots of the bones into the mount. So we're kind of confused as to why the 2 things exist as independent entities, and we've never gotten to the bottom of that. At the moment, we think what look like bones in the specimen are replicas of some kind, a plaster or something. What look like teeth aren't the real teeth. The skull is definitely of a Canada lynx, but not 100% certain that the skin is as well. Science never stops. You've never finished a project. There's always more analyses you can do. I do hope one day to go back to the specimen and X-ray it. And Ben Garrett, who's particularly interested in mammal anatomy, he's had a few TV series on bone anatomy and stuff. Ben Garrett looked at the specimen a few years back, and he found loads of evidence of injury and a really hard life that the skeleton of this animal had while it was in captivity. It had its toes had been clipped off and its teeth were in really poor condition. It was quite a sorry animal when it died. Our main aim was to not just work out, as I've said, what kind of animal it was, but also to determine if it was living wild when it was shot. How long had it been living in the wild? What could it be regarded as like a long-term resident? Long-term for a lynx means about a decade. They're not that long-lived, as you know. But we were hoping that we might work that out, and we kind of couldn't really. We couldn't work out that it didn't seem to have been living in the wild for very long.
But it begs the question how often other similar cases might have happened through past decades and centuries. And each one is perhaps a set piece one, but there may well have been others. This is just one that we've caught up with.
That was my motivation for publishing it, because near the top of the list when it comes to animals that are good at escaping from captivity are the cats. The cats are brilliant at climbing and sneaking around and getting out of places. This is part of that story. This is an animal that presumably escaped at some point and lived wild for a time, and therefore says something about the British big cat phenomenon.
Great. We'll return to that later, but for now we'll have a quick touch on this splendid book from Columbia University Press by Mark Hallett and John Harris, On the Prowl in Search of Big Cat Origins. It's a lead into our discussion on the deep time history of cats, and we'll come on to the Britain and Europe perspective. But as far as this book is concerned, it's very much about the evolutionary history of the cats, especially the big ones, the pantherins. What did you make of it, and what are your highlights from it, Darren?
I really, really like this book. Mark Hallett is a world-leading paleo artist, best known for his work on dinosaurs, but he's done loads of mammals as well. I know him quite well. An interesting fact I have to mention is he only has one arm.
Gosh.
And despite that, he's a world-leading, famous paleo artist. Yeah, his mammal work is amazing. Lots of it in this book. And John Harris, co-author, is a very well-known paleomammalogist, best known for his association with the La Brea tar pits. And some of you will know that's an oxymoron, the tar pits. He's strongly associated with Lothagam in, I think, Kenya, a famous mammal site in East Africa. Published loads of work on mammals from there. This book is just on specifically the group that they call the pantherins. Other people would rather call those the pantherines. I won't go into the complex reason for that, but this is only on the true big cats. So if you want a book that's on the whole of cat evolution, this is not it. I'm sure, most people that are interested in big cats and their fossil relatives will be aware of Alan Turner and Mauricio Anton's book, The Big Cats and Their Fossil Relatives, a more rounded review of all cats. So this is On the Prowl is just on the pantherins. And it's kind of split into 5 sections, really briefly. I mean, so pantherins are just clouded leopards, and then the panthera cats, so snow leopards, tigers, and then the spotted big cats, lions, leopards, jaguars. Lions are spotted big cats, as most people know. First of all, they review the evolution of cats in general. They talk about anatomy. Our current understanding of cat evolution, the modern cats, that what we call the crown group, that's the group that includes all the living lineages, that's a late Miocene event. The Miocene is between approximately, say, 20-ish and 8-ish million years ago. And ever since about 2006, genetic studies have shown that crown cats originated in the late Miocene, so like around about 15 million years ago. One of the key take-homes from this book, what forms the core of the book, the second and third sections really, are that a series of discoveries made within the last couple of years have shown that the evolution of pantherins is linked to a major geological event that happened at this time, and that's the formation of the Tibetan Plateau. So the collision of India pushes up the Himalayas, the giant Tibetan Plateau is pushed up during the Miocene, between about 20 and 8 million years ago. Loads of work on loads of different animal groups has shown that lots of Southern Asian mammals that were kind of uplifted on this giant plateau evolved a whole load of specializations due to the resulting thinner atmosphere and cooler temperatures. the Tibetan Plateau has been called the third pole of the planet, because if you think of how important the Arctic has been to the evolution of lots of animals, Antarctica maybe not so much, because us here in the north, we're not so interested in penguins and southern seals and whatnot. But the impact these things have had on global climate and the evolution of animal groups is substantial. And the same for the Tibetan Plateau. It seems to have been like a kind of training ground or proofing ground for many lineages that later on were able to, during times of cooler climates, spread around the world. And they were kind of like pre-adapted for cool climate conditions because of their evolution on the Tibetan Plateau. This is true for mammoths and woolly rhinos. The argument made in this book is that it was true for pantherins. They reckon that this one group of cats, the pantherins, just clouded leopard and panther cat clade, they reckon that their like body shape, their physiology, their way of life is to do with adaptation to life on the Tibetan Plateau. This is supported by fossils. The oldest members of the pantherin clade are from the Tibetan Plateau. There's an animal called Panthera blithiae, I think, which was named in 2010 even. The family history of pantherins themselves, the shape of the family tree, is evidence of origination in this region. So if you think of the pantherin family tree as like a branching diagram, the clouded leopards, obviously they're Southern Asian. They're not necessarily on the Tibetan Plateau, but they're in that region. But then the tigers and snow leopards, they are ancestrally of the Tibetan Plateau. And then the other big cats appear to have spread from there. So the third part of the book is what happened after origin on the Tibetan Plateau. It's the idea that you've got these various lineages spreading throughout the whole of Asia, and then also across Africa and also throughout the Americas. The fourth part of the book is a mostly European story to do with the fossil cats that are known from the European cave faunas, France, Germany, and the UK. This is where pantherins came into more contact than ever before with saber-tooths, which are a much older cat lineage, and also hyenas and bears. There's all these amazing cases of evidence for actual predatory interaction between cave lions and cave bears and hyenas. Amazing. And then the fifth part of the book is the impact of humanity in the broadest sense of the term, not just our own species, Homo sapiens, but hominins. Because if you've got big cats of various lineages evolving alongside hominins, which are mostly an African group, of course, but have moved out of Africa on several occasions, then you not only have the story of, say, species like, Neanderthals and Homo heidelbergensis interacting with big cats, you've also then got the far more recent stuff, past 30,000 years or so, that involves our species affecting the Pleistocene megafauna, that ultimately affecting the predators that were reliant on the megafauna. And then you could say that attrition caused by our species is continued to today. It's just been a gradual reduction of wild animals caused by us until today. Well, we all know where we are now with the big cats. They're all of them in dire trouble. And that's the last part of the book, the decline of cats.
Yeah, very interesting to see pure scientists, if you like, turn into social scientists in that latter section, discussing the physical impact of human beings on cats. Because earlier on, there's so much about the evolutionary predatory-prey relationships and wonderful diagrams about that. And then it becomes man as the main predator having the impact, turning the tables on these great predators from the past.
Yeah, I've always been disappointed is too strong a word, but if you look at books that ever chart the history of any group of animals, you tend to get the same snippets from geological deep time discussed. Then, and it'll finish with the Pleistocene, the so-called Ice Age animals, and then it'll skip to the modern fauna. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what about all that stuff that happened not only concerning the decline of the Pleistocene megafauna, which happened, late Pleistocene, possibly some of it into the early Holocene, the last 11,700 years or so. But then you've also got this very unusual, to modern eyes, unusual period that's not often discussed. We don't even have a proper name for it. It's been called zooarchaeology, where you're not talking about humans, so it's not archaeology, but you are talking about a time when there's agricultural, pastoral, nomadic people living alongside, still thriving, still abundant megafauna, and everything about human culture and folklore and mythology and everything is still affected by their proximity to these kinds of animals.
Yeah, we were beyond hunter-gatherers, yet we still had an impact.
Well, yeah, this will be familiar to your audience and to yourself, but the fact that animals like, lions and leopards are animals of, say, Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and are probably persisting in places like Turkey until the 20th century. This is such like a long, drawn-out thing, with us living alongside, these other animals and interacting with them constantly and being inspired by them is a huge story that just isn't really done well often enough. There's only really a handful of books that really tried to do it. So I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, the fact that they covered it at the end part of this book is like, well done. We absolutely need that. I'm really pleased that that's been put in there. Yeah. Somebody like you know a lot of the stuff in a book like that, but anything that surprised you, anything really new and you thought, wow, that's adding to my knowledge. Is anything like that quickly that you'd mention? I remember Brian Patterson's book on the famous maneless lions of Savo makes the point that the reason that the European colonists who were building the railway down in Savo, the reason that they thought those lions were so unusual and so mysterious, lots of speculation about them being, are they even lions? Are they some other kind of big cat? That was because the stereotypical view of lions is this, Kenyan animal that you see in, every single documentary you ever watch, almost everything you ever watch on lions. The description and the anatomy might pertain well to that group of lions, but for a group of animals, well, lion taxonomy is controversial, but for one or two or three species, however many species of lions you want to accept, for animals that lived from the very southernmost tip of Africa, right across the whole of Eurasia, throughout North America, and possibly Central and Northern South America, that's controversial. For this hugely diverse, widespread animal, think how diverse, we are, all the different kinds of, the looks you have to different people. Lions have that massive variation in appearance, according to local adaptation and lifestyles and so on. One or two books say that, but where can you actually go to a place that actually talks about that diversity and how those lions are adapted? I'm always bothered by the fact that that isn't covered. This book has done that. And again, the illustrations, I'm looking at one of the plates in the book which illustrates that perfectly. And you just glance at it and think, wow, they're the same creature, but look at the different distinctions, and only one of them looks like what you'd expect to see in our zoos, for example. Pat on the back for those authors. It's a lovely scholarly work and a treat of a book to have to dip into. And very affordable. Yeah, you're right, for that kind of book, for a hardback illustrated book. So can we move on to deep history of cats and go on to Britain and Europe? Because there's sort of four things to talk about. There's pumas in Europe, there's leopards in Europe, jaguars in Europe, and the jungle cat, remarkably. Can we first of all talk about pumas in Europe? Is it Puma pardoiles you would define it as? Yeah, so this is an animal, it's got a complex taxonomic history, which is the case for so many things. Today it's Puma pardoides. Discovered in, I think, Somerset, named in 1846-ish by the famous anatomist and paleontologist Richard Owen, later Sir Richard Owen, and he called it Felis pardoides, panther-like cat, incredibly vague name. And then later on, this animal called Schaub's panther was described from, I think, Germany. That was interpreted as a new genus. When some new specimens were found in France, that became known as Viritellurus schaubi, this new short-faced puma-like cat. And then fast forward to early 2000s, a couple of cat researchers said, wait a minute, these are all the same species. And this isn't just a puma-like cat. Viritellurus is a puma. Oh, and it is the same thing as Owen's panther. It belongs in the genus Puma, so that it's a European puma. It turns out that the features that had been regarded as making Viritellurus unusual, the proportions of its face and which teeth it had and such, are characteristic of the genus Puma. After this was noticed, this was by a cat researcher called, I think he's called Marcus Hemmler, about 2004. He noticed that some fossil cats from the Transcaucasus Mountains and Mongolia are the same thing again. So now you've got this European puma. It's not just European, it's an Asian as well. And then more recently at Turner and Anton in that Big Cats book, they reckon that a bunch of South African and East African fossil cats described as leopards are actually more specimens of this animal. So they're saying there's like a Puma pardoides is in Africa too. It had been thought since the 1980s that obviously today you think of the puma, you think of an American animal. Since the 80s, it had been thought that pumas have an old world origin because genetics shows that pumas are closest to cheetahs. And of course, cheetahs, asinonyx, the pumas are, today they're African and Asian. We know of fossil cheetahs from Europe as well. There's a giant fossil cheetah known from France and India and China. So you've got reasons for thinking that this cheetah puma group is ancestrally African or Eurasian. Well, then at some point it's got to cross the Bering Land Bridge to give rise to the American puma. So if you now add in the fossil animal, Puma pardoides is present in Africa and it's present throughout Europe and it's present in Eastern Asia. What probably happened is that the living puma probably evolved in Asia. We've got no evidence for that from fossils at the moment because it appears fully formed, air quotes, fully formed. It appears in the North American fossil record in the late Pleistocene at around about, I think it's about 500,000 years old. So pumas moved into North America, then into South America from Asia. There's an added complication here that we'll avoid now, and that's the jaguarundi, because the jaguarundi is also part of this group as well. Mm-hmm. And what its history is confounding variable in this. And it's also thought that North American pumas became extinct, and then North American pumas reinvaded the north from the south. So all North American pumas today are actually South American pumas. From our British point of view, pumas prehistorically, going back like 500,000 years or 1 million years, deep time, were present in certainly southern England, maybe widespread in UK and elsewhere in Western Europe. And this animal probably didn't look that different from the living puma. Maybe it was more spotty or darker brown, the living Puma concolor. We just don't know. But yes, pumas are European natives. So that's exciting. We're talking Pleistocene. So it's an animal of the Ice Ages. Pleistocene is about 2.5 million years ago until about 11,700 years ago. I think that some of these Puma pardoides fossils are from the Pleistocene. As someone who mostly works on dinosaurs, the Pleistocene is like gardening to me. It's like, it's really shallow stuff that's recent history. In real terms, in terms of what it means to us today, 2 million years ago is an absurdly long time ago. And saying that an animal is a Pleistocene animal doesn't put it anywhere close to modern times. This, of course, is relevant to any discussions we have about, things like rewilding, where we're talking all the time about bringing in animals that were present in Western Europe, the UK specifically, within recent times. And what's the cutoff point? What do you regard as recent times? Is it the last, the last couple of centuries? Are we talking about the whole of the Holocene, the last 11,700 years or so? I would say that we probably shouldn't include the Pleistocene in that.
Yeah, otherwise we're talking about theme parks rather than interacting with humans as we know our civilizations now.
Yeah, the Pleistocene world is different from the Holocene world in some significant ways.
Okay, can we go on to leopards in Europe? Again, there's more of a history than people will realise, I suspect.
Yeah, so excuse me, but I wish I could just off the top of my head say specific locations and dates and stuff, and I can't. But vaguely speaking, the living African leopard, Pantherapardus, is known as a fossil from various locations across Western Europe. Pretty sure it's definitely known from France. Well, there is, of course, one famous cave painting. I've forgotten the location, but there's one really nice spotty leopard cave illustration, which is probably, that cave art is very variable in age. Anything from 50,000 years ago until 20,000 years ago. So thousands and thousands of years people were producing this stuff. That leopard image is, I've got a feeling it's from Chauvet Cave in France.
I'm cheating because I've revved up an old laptop with one of your presentations on, and I'm looking at that very picture you're talking about, and it is remarkable. There's no doubt it is a leopard.
Does it say the location?
It doesn't, no, but we'll put it on the website so people can look on the website. We'll add it there.
The thing that's always interested me about that leopard is this leopard looks really distinctive because its belly is shown as really quite prominently unspotted, and it looks as if it had like a pretty extensive white belly. And I think there's something about it which creates something in the illustration, makes it look shaggy coated. Those features make it superficially resemble an Amur leopard, one of the sort of, cool adapted Eastern Asian ones, which kind of makes sense for the climate. It's been said from their bones that these European leopards are most similar to African leopards, more so than any of the Asian or Middle Eastern forms, which could hint at some, surprisingly complex biogeographic history. Maybe, we think for lions that lions moved out of Africa in several successive waves, the same as our species did. So it could be that was the case for leopards as well. We don't really know. The leopard was definitely present across Western Europe, including the UK, during the Pleistocene. All of these Pleistocene big cats persisted into the late Pleistocene. They don't get to the so-called modern age, the Holocene. They don't get to like the last 11,000 years or so. Our youngest records of them are around about 30,000 years ago-ish. They're spending tens of thousands of years living alongside us, but they're not into the modern agricultural post-Pleistocene age. Exactly how recently leopards persisted across southern Europe is still a bit uncertain. I'm not sure this has been studied that well since like the early 2000s. There's some studies which report leopard bones from, say, northern Italy and stuff, and are meant to be a couple of thousand years old, like say 3,000 years old. Some people have said that this is evidence that the leopard was persisting, in places like the Balkans and northern Italy, the fringes of the Mediterranean, until really recent times, which, you can well believe. I could absolutely believe that, especially given their persistence, in countries like Iran and India and Afghanistan.
And the Anatolian leopard debate.
Yeah, absolutely. Other people have said that maybe these northern Italian leopards could have been brought in from Africa by the Romans. I mean, we know for sure that the Romans did bring in tens of thousands of African animals to various places in the Roman Empire. To my knowledge, there isn't any demonstrable proof that we found evidence for animals like African leopards in Italy. I think in the same breath, some people, particularly those, with an interest in British big cats, have said, well, wait a minute, Britain was part of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, definite mosaic illustrations of both spotted and black leopards and other cats, but particularly leopards.
Yeah, I've heard about those, but I've never seen them.
Yeah, Woodchester in Gloucestershire. We'll put that up on the website as well under this episode. Got to watch our time, but very quickly, this jaguar in Europe.
Yeah, we didn't just have leopards, we definitely had jaguars as well. Without going into all the details, the history of the jaguar, again, today quintessentially American cat, ancestrally not American at all. Like the leopard and the lion, the jaguar evolved in Eurasia, possibly in Africa. There's fossils of certainly jaguar-like big cats from across Eurasia and Africa. And there's a European animal. It was first named from Germany. I think it was named in like the 1930s. It's got a fairly awkward name, Panthera gombasagoensis. Its best European location is Westbury sub Mendip, the name of the cave system in Westbury in Somerset. There's lots of fossils of Panthera gombasagoensis from that region. And people as in, like experts on Pleistocene mammals, they've always called this animal a European jaguar. And then within the last sort of 15 years or so, some experts on fossil big cats have said, it's not just a relative of the jaguar. It probably is similar enough to be the same species. This depends on how your speciesometer is calibrated. This is a thing that people argue about all the time in biology and paleontology. But it could be the same species as the jaguar, but it's certainly very similar to it. It's got the distinctive, really robust, broad, powerful skull of modern jaguars. We've got evidence for this animal, like I say, across Europe, Asia. It presumably gave rise to the modern jaguar population, which then moved into the Americas, and then all the others go extinct. So what looks to us like an American animal is certainly not. That's just its kind of relict part of its range. But yeah, if you were moving around in even just southern England, not in the wilds of the north. Of course, southern England was heavily wooded and whatnot back then. But we had leopards, jaguars, pumas. We haven't mentioned lions, but of course it's well known. Southern England definitely had the lion. Also, we had jaguars until late in the Pleistocene. Again, until about 30,000 years ago, probably.
But they weren't chomping caimans and turtles, but other substantial prey.
The European pond turtle actually would have been present in the warmer parts of the Pleistocene. That's known. Yeah, I mean, jaguars are phenomenal animals. They can do just about anything, turn their proverbial hands to the predation of anything.
Then finally, in the historical records, that the Felis chouse, the jungle cat, much, much smaller, and something which again is reported in Britain. We've done an episode on jungle cat reports. We shouldn't just regard that as an Southern Asian cat.
No, I mean, for all the animals we've mentioned so far, you could say that you've got the knowledge of the fossil animals first, and then, those of us interested in British big cats have discussed the fossil species within the context of the modern phenomenon. But for the jungle cat, it's the other way round. We have known, certainly, I think it's since the late 80s, isn't it, that there are jungle cats being seen and killed and found dead in various parts of the UK.
Because of breeding for the chouse, mainly, presumably.
I've lost track of how many specimens it is now that have been wild type jungle cats or swamp cats that have been killed or
at least 3
found dead. At least, yeah. The discovery of the swamp cat, jungle cat, as a British native is a recent discovery and a surprising one. It's also known from Germany, from the Pleistocene of Germany. There's no indication that it survived into the Holocene. So again, it's not an animal that's at the edge of history, but in the broader perspective, you could regard it as, part of the British fauna, certainly of the Pleistocene.
Yeah, it had a niche here, and it was larger than the Scottish wildcat sort of niche. It was a small mesopredator.
Yeah, so it would be an enemy of the European wildcat, occupied the next guild up. But yeah, the fact that you've got those species are living alongside one another. I don't call them Scottish wildcats, European wildcat, because it was present across the whole of Britain, including Ireland. Obviously until far more recently than the rest of the animals we've been talking about. But yeah, swamp cat or jungle cat, Felis chouse is on the list as a Pleistocene British native. That was a surprise when it was announced. A lady called Daniel Shreve, and I think it was published 2004, 2006, something like that. But yeah, relatively recent discovery.
Yeah, thank you. Let's draw some conclusions and thoughts back to British big cats now and into the future. I think one of the issues here is evolution and mixtures and adaptation. We shouldn't discount mixtures, oddities, quirks and hybrids. And if there are some hybrids, are there some hybrids that have actually become consistent? I know you're pretty open-minded on that, Darren.
If you pay attention to eyewitness accounts, including some really quite detailed close-up accounts, doesn't sound like they're describing your classic tubby-bodied, big, unusually tubby animal that people are familiar with due to, seeing them in captivity or on TV. People are often talking about very rangy, leggy, slender cats. Cats are obviously supremely adaptable. A hypothetical puma type cat or leopard type cat, a hypothetical animal living in the British countryside, is going to have no trouble finding food. There's a vast amount of it. But it's not going to be having such a life of luxury that it's going to be able to pack on the pounds and, become some prize specimen. It is probably going to be like a very well exercised animal that's had a tough life. So I kind of think that might account for some of what people describe. But then the fact that some of these descriptions do sound slightly odd in terms of the length of the tail, portions of the limbs, subtle things sometimes, like the shapes of the ears. I pay attention to the fact that quite a few witnesses do talk about pointed ears more often than you'd expect, even in black cats. Does it mean that we're actually sometimes talking about members of some of the less well-known big cat populations. So again, you think of the leopard, and most of us think of either Indian leopards or East African leopards, but Southern Asian ones, the Southeast Asian ones, they can be, and some of the African ones as well, they can be surprisingly small relative to what people expect. You note this yourself in your book, Rick, and they will also look very, I was going to say alien, but thought better of it. They look quite odd relative to what people expect. And I do wonder if that is part of it, especially given that Britain is almost unique in the world in the virtually, due to our aggressively colonial background, every animal from across the whole of the world has been bought here at some time or another. Like we said, cats are good at escaping and have definitely been released at times. So I do wonder if that is part of it. Are we seeing members of unusual populations? They would only have to breed here for a couple of generations, contingent with this, like I said, this relatively tough lifestyle involving lots of exercise and stuff for you to get, these rangy, leggy animals. And then the hybridization thing, the more evidence that's come in over the past couple of decades on the rampant hybridization that happens in wild living big mammals of all groups. It turns out that, most familiar, like large carnivores, this is documented for, bears and wolves and coyotes in particular, and some foxes as well. They're kind of like hybrid swarms. And it's like they might prefer to only, stick to their own and mate with members of their own species. But if they're on heat, if they're desperate, if they're not able to find a mate of the right kind, more or less anything of the right size and shape will do. And of course, cats are so unusual in that they have this amazing hybridization potential. It seems that almost anything goes. Obviously you've got confounding variation in body size that prevents some pairings, but anything like above the size of like a lynx or a small leopard or puma, they in theory can hybridize. This is speculation, absolutely, but the fact that people report animals that look odd and sound odd, in terms of the vocalizations they make and so on, I am intrigued by the possibility that there could be some unusual hybridization that we wouldn't expect. We know it can happen in captivity. You may be aware of similar cases. I know of cases where hares have been analysed. I always argue that for alleged big cat hares, it's best to... The hairs of any alleged big animal, don't rely on genetics, don't rely on morphology. You have to have data from both to come up with a confident answer. And I'm aware of cases where analysed hares do look like unusual combinations of, puma and leopard. There are such hares existing in collections. It's a really intriguing and valid idea, and it would explain some part of the phenomenon.
Yeah, potentially much more messy than we might think and realise, which makes this scientific baseline work very tricky, doesn't it? Because if you haven't got matches and you've only got small samples to work from, you haven't got any trend analysis. Very, very challenging, even though this is, frontiers of science and evolution and adaptation that we ought to be trying to struggle to do here.
Yes.
Equally intriguing, have we got an evolving subspecies of black leopard here? Have we got an isolated population of pumas which may sometimes produce black melanistic ones? I don't think we can discount those thoughts. They're radical and too extreme for some people, but I think we simply must be open-minded to that. Even though I am frequently surprised at how consistent the reports of the main three cats are. There are enough quirks and oddities to make you think, gosh, there's something else happening as well. But so difficult to catch up with them. And, of course, some people who have decent evidence, which will count as primary evidence, are very reluctant to release it and reveal it. They see it as sensitive and tricky and challenging. So that adds to the frustration.
Well, for as long as I've been interested in British big cats academically, and for as long as I've been actually involved in academia myself, I have been, without wanting to be rude, I've been frustrated by quite a few people in the British big cat community because I know they've got the data and I've seen it myself. Talking about hares, I'm aware of a couple of cases where DNA has successfully been extracted, and I'm aware of scat and bite marks on bones, all of which I personally have found compelling. In the past, the people I've tried to move on this, I've been unsuccessful in getting them to put the time and effort in to push that stuff towards publication. Science does set the bar very high in terms of the level of evidence that's considered acceptable if you want to get something published. Not only do you have to put in all this time and effort, sometimes at great personal expense, getting things analysed, you also have to give up the material. It needs to go to a collection where it can be retained for further study and for testing by others if needed. Those things combined with, I'm not going to badmouth anyone, but I have found it's not uncommon for people interested in mystery animals to be sort of almost anti-science and sometimes anti-scientific community. So that's been a problem in the past. I'm not necessarily referring to anyone who's active in the field today. Certainly the last time I made an effort to get anywhere on this, it didn't work out. But the evidence is there for those people who are super skeptical about it.
I think it's just a long term. It's a slow burn issue, and I think if we're persistent, we'll some of these things that are up people's sleeves will drop out eventually, and we'll add to the collection and sample. And I know that the tooth pit analysis, the carnassial triangular sort of imprints on the bones, I'm involved as one of the brokers in that work, and we haven't managed to do the academic paper yet. But a recent completed dissertation student is going to lead the write-up of the work. Although we're later than we'd like to be, the fact is that there's now a greater number of samples from a greater number of locations on a greater number of prey species. So, in fact, later in the day, that academic paper is going to be stronger and more robust because of its sample size and sample distribution. So there's that kind of benefit. When the tooth pit work is published, it's going to be influential because it will be a major breakthrough, I think.
I can't wait for that work to be published. I mean, I find that really compelling. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's also nice because people can actually look for that. It's a classic case where everybody can be a citizen science, and if they're out and about and they see bone remains and they think there could be big cat involvement, they can check themselves and report it in, and that's what's been happening. And I know some podcast listeners are looking out for tooth pits on the bones, which is terrific. I mean, we're all in it together. It's a team effort, and that's what citizen science is all about.
Yes, I would definitely be writing about it when it is published. I really look forward to that.
Great. We're petering out, Darren. Finally, is there anything else you wanted to say that we've not covered that you wanted to emphasise in terms of your perspective on the British big cat subject?
We didn't mention, of course, the Eurasian lynx presence in the UK, but the fact that species was present certainly way into geologically modern times, way into the Holocene. That reason means that, unlike the other species we've been talking about, the true big cats, the Eurasian lynx is a viable rewilding candidate, given that air quotes, it should be here, and it's habitat destruction and hunting caused by us that have caused its removal. It should be here along with a long list of Holocene animals we had.
And although I would argue that you could say that because of the sightings, there may be a viable population already of Eurasian lynx in some parts of some regions of Britain. Even so, to have that population supplemented by new introductions that would be radio-collared, we'd then know their territories, we'd know where they went and what they might bump into that isn't radio-collared.
I sometimes get the impression that rewilding is regarded as, well, wouldn't it be nice if ... wouldn't it be fun if ... But it's like, well, there is actually a need to have an ecological need to have at least a mid-sized predator in the British wilds again, because, I think, we're all aware of how many deer we've got of about 7 or 8 species, most of which aren't native, which do have a significant ecological impact. And we also know, you'll be aware of this and you've covered it before, the fact that when lynxes and also wolves as well, actually, when people have discovered in parts of continental Europe that these animals are persisting in fragmented populations, nobody knows they're there. They have no real impact on livestock. They're never seen by people. They're so cryptic. I like the case of the Italian wolves, where there was a push to see if they could reintroduce a northern Italian population, and there was substantial outcry from farmers. No, we don't want wolves reintroduced back here. That's ridiculous. And then the same team that was talking about reintroducing them then discovered that there already were wolves there, and this particular population had never gone extinct, which meant they didn't need to reintroduce them. But nobody had noticed that they were persisting. I mean, okay, you could argue that what with the mountains in Italy, that its situation is not quite the same as that of the UK. But on the other hand, maybe it's not that different. I mean, we're not talking about putting these animals in like downtown Oxford or something. We are talking about in appropriate open spaces with very low human population density. So yeah, that's yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't want to veer into kind of conspiracy territory, but I wouldn't super surprise me if there was an effort to covertly reintroduce lynxes and maybe some other animals that are part of this discussion.
I always say to the advocates of these reintroduction candidates that there may be more that have spilt out accidentally or deliberately, irresponsibly, than you imagine. And also, don't thump the table to want it to happen sort of overnight. If the ideas are being discussed, eventually the genie will get out of the bottle somehow, presumably. And also, we need discussion time. We need time to adapt, to train and to manage the countryside in slightly different, tweaked ways as a result. For example, beavers, when you go to places in Europe that have them, they have farm advisors that hire or donate electric fences to people. That's all you need, to stop the beaver, going through a dike or going through a watercourse on a golf course where it's not wanted. There are little tweaks in the management of the landscape that can happen as a result of some of these creatures. There doesn't have to be some alarmist intolerance, but so it is about adapting our own sort of thought processes. I think if we're prone to not like something, whatever it is in life, we sort of exaggerate the impacts. But likewise, I think if we're prone to like something, we can be soft on its impacts as well. So it's not like there's no issues, but they're management issues. And I think what you're driving at is there are ecosystem functional benefits from these animals that are reintroduction candidates. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
It's so ironic that that we may have more big cats here, more medium-sized big cats here than we know about, and they're not causing many issues. And of course, once one or two do, it's a disproportional impact in the media and discussion. And yeah, there's the challenge, isn't it? It's a cultural challenge as much as a scientific and practical one.
I'm sure you think about this all the time, but imagine a future where it's demonstrated that there are non-native cats living in the UK. We're absolutely 100% sure you can satisfy the most rejectionist of skeptics. Okay, where do we stand on on rewilding now? What do we do now? It's like, oh, well, first of all, okay, clearly it works. As in it works, as in you can have the animals there and minimal impact. And secondly, do we actually need them if we do have them already?
Yeah, and what is their status? That's why I'm always wary of the non-native term. Lots of things that are non-native don't have much impact. We just tend to highlight the ones that do have ecosystem impacts and crush the niches of other fellow wildlife species. I think if these animals are adapting and evolving, maybe they're demonstrating that that they have got a niche here which isn't threatening and problematic for others. So that the non-native label is a bit tricky, I think.
I think I might probably move to wider use of the term naturalized. I mean, there's loads of animals that I'm really familiar with, I see every day, that aren't technically. An example is the tube web spider, Segestria. It lives on like every house here. I mean, I'm in Southampton. It lives on every house here. It's the same in Bristol, Bath, London, Plymouth. A big black spider that lives in a tube. It's not a native animal, but it's everywhere. It's been here for decades. It's not going away. It's part of our fauna. So, and we speak of those animals as naturalized. There's a long list of them.
There's things that are honorary natives, aren't there? Brown hares would be an example. We all love brown hares, really, don't we?
Yes, that's a slightly controversial example, but certainly our deer are. And, the only two native deer we've got are the red and the roe. And even most of the populations of them that exist here are non-native. They're mostly continental ones that were introduced by the Victorians.
Yeah, nature's more of a cocktail than we imagine. Darren, we've run out of time, but I'm sure listeners are so pleased that we've had you on and benefited from your sort of university lecture, but it's a university lecture that will stick in the mind and enrich us. So thanks ever so much for coming on the show. Hope we can keep in touch. We'll add those key points to the website listing under this edition. And thanks ever so much for your time, and great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was great being a guest. Thanks a lot.
OK, next episode we will be deep in the woods and forests of Shropshire in the west edge of the Midlands, close to the Welsh border. We'll be with James. He's had several recent sightings and incidents with big black cats, presumably leopards, and with puma-type cats. We'll especially hear about James's nighttime tracking and his vigils in the forest environment, sometimes up close with a leopard perhaps. So hope you can join us back for episode 55 from Shropshire. Righto, we're signing off now, so a big thanks once again to our guest Darren Naish, and thank you everyone for listening. Take care and bye for now.